In the vast and unforgiving theater of naval warfare, some ships are remembered for their sheer size, others for their firepower, and a select few for the sheer audacity of their careers. The German warship Scharnhorst belonged to that last category. She was a vessel born of defiance, a predator that haunted the Atlantic and the Arctic, and a symbol of the Kriegsmarine's ambition. Her story is one of celebrated victories, daring escapes, and a final, brutal showdown in the icy darkness of the North Cape. She was a ship that for a time seemed untouchable. But in war, luck is a currency that eventually runs out. This is the story of the Scharnhorst, from her controversial birth to her violent death at the bottom of the Barents Sea. To truly understand the Scharnhorst, you have to go back to the aftermath of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles had shackled the German military, especially its navy. They were forbidden from building any capital ship displacing more than 10,000 tons, and their guns could be no larger than 11 inches. For years, Germany complied, building what became known as pocket battleships, clever designs that packed a heavy punch while staying, at least on paper, within the treaty limits. But by the 1930s, with Adolf Hitler in power, the treaty's restrictions were seen less as a legal boundary and more as a challenge to be creatively overcome. When the keel of the Scharnhorst was laid down in 1935, she represented a quantum leap for the resurgent Kriegsmarine. She and her sister ship, Gneisenau, were bigger, faster, and more heavily armored than anything Germany had built since the Great War. This immediately sparked a fierce debate that continues among naval historians to this day. Was Scharnhorst a battleship or a battlecruiser? The Germans themselves classified her as a Schlachtschiff, a battleship. Her armor protection was certainly on par with many foreign battleships, with a main belt up to 350 millimeters thick. Her Achilles heel, in the eyes of many, was her main armament. She carried 9 11-inch, 283mm guns in 3 triple turrets. While these were modern, rapid-firing, and highly accurate weapons, they were significantly smaller than the 14, 15, or 16-inch guns carried by the capital ships of Great Britain, the United States, and Japan. The British Royal Navy, never shy with an opinion, took one look at her powerful engines, her blistering top speed of over 31 knots, and her lighter main guns, and promptly classified her as a battlecruiser. This speed, however, was her trump card. She was designed to be a commerce raider. Fast enough to outrun any battleship, powerful enough to sink her, and powerful enough to destroy any cruiser fast enough to catch her. In that role, she was a masterpiece of naval engineering. Her early career was a baptism of fire. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were unleashed. In early 1941, they executed Operation Berlin, a devastatingly effective commerce raid in the Atlantic Ocean. Under the command of Admiral Günther Lütjens, who would later command the ill-fated sortie of the Bismarck, the two ships slipped past the Royal Navy, and for 2 months, they were ghosts. They were the perfect predators, using their speed to appear out of nowhere, sink merchant ships, and vanish before the British home fleet could even react. By the time they slipped into the port of Brest in occupied France, they had sunk or captured 22 ships, totaling over 115,000 gross register tons. This period became known as the Happy Time for German forces, and for the British, the 2 ships, which they nicknamed the Ugly Sisters, became a source of constant anxiety. Their time in Brest, however, turned them from hunters into the hunted. The port was well within range of the Royal Air Force, or RAF, and for the next 11 months, the ships were subjected to relentless bombing raids. While they were never dealt a knockout blow, they suffered a death by 1,000 cuts. Constant damage and repairs kept them locked in port, neutralizing their threat to the Atlantic convoys. By early 1942, the German High Command made a decision that was as bold as it was seemingly insane. Instead of risking a breakout into the Atlantic, the ships were ordered to return to Germany. The route they chose was the most direct, the most dangerous, and the most heavily defended waterway in the world, the English Channel. The plan was codenamed Operation Cerberus, but it would go down in history as the Channel Dash. The German planners knew that surprise was impossible. Their only hope was to hide in plain sight, relying on overwhelming air cover, a massive escort of destroyers and torpedo boats, and the sheer shock of a daylight passage. On the night of February 11, 1942, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen slipped their moorings and headed for the Channel. The British were caught completely, bafflingly off guard. Faulty intelligence, bureaucratic delays, and a healthy dose of disbelief meant that by the time the alarm was properly raised, the German squadron was already steaming past the cliffs of Dover. What followed was a frantic and chaotic series of British attacks. Ancient swordfish biplanes, bravely flown by pilots who knew they were on a suicide mission, attacked with torpedoes, only to be swatted from the sky by German fighters. Coastal artillery batteries fired blindly into the mist. Destroyers made desperate, high-speed attacks. But the German planning was meticulous. The Luftwaffe's fighter screen was impenetrable, and the naval escort was perfectly coordinated. It was a stunning operational success for the Germans, and one of the most profound humiliations for the Royal Navy and RAF in the entire war. But the Scharnhorst did not escape unscathed. Off the Dutch coast, she struck a mine. The explosion was immense, plunging the ship into darkness, knocking out her power, and causing her to stop dead in the water. For a terrifying half-hour, she was a sitting duck. But her crew was magnificent. In the darkness and chaos, engineers and damage control parties worked with disciplined fury. Within minutes, they had restored partial power, and soon after, the mighty ship was underway again, eventually rejoining the squadron. Just a few hours later, off the Terschelling bank, she hit a second mine. Once again, the expert crew contained the damage, and despite taking on over 1,000 tons of water, she limped into Wilhelmshaven under her own power. The Channel Dash had been a success, but it had come at a cost. While her sister ship Gneisenau would be so badly damaged in a bombing raid shortly after that she would never be repaired, Scharnhorst was destined for one last theater of operations, the frozen, unforgiving waters of the Arctic. After extensive repairs and training, she was deployed to northern Norway in March 1943. Her new mission was to interdict the vital Arctic convoys, the lifeline of supplies from the Western Allies to the Soviet Union. Here, in the land of the midnight sun and polar night, the Scharnhorst was the queen of the board, a fleeting being whose mere presence forced the Royal Navy to deploy heavy escorts for every single convoy. She had already proven her lethality in these waters. Back in June 1940, during the Norwegian campaign, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had stumbled upon the British aircraft carrier HMS Glorious and her two escorting destroyers, Ardent and Acasta. In a rare engagement between battleship and carrier on the open sea, the German ships used their superior gunnery to devastating effect. They sank all three British vessels. A major victory. But not before the destroyer Acasta launched a spread of torpedoes. One of them found its mark, tearing a huge hole in Scharnhorst's hull and forcing her to return to port for lengthy repairs. The action had been a success, but it was a stark reminder that even the smaller ships could bite back. Now, in late 1943, the strategic situation was grim for Germany. The tide of the war had turned. The German leadership was desperate for a victory, a propaganda coup to boost morale back home. The target was convoy JW-55B, heading from Murmansk. Intelligence reported it was lightly escorted. On Christmas Day 1943, under orders from Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz to press the attack with skill and daring, the Scharnhorst slipped out of her fjord anchorage for the last time. Her mission was codenamed Operation Ostfront. In command was Conter-Admiral Erich By, an experienced destroyer commander, but one who was new to commanding a capital ship. The weather was atrocious, with gale-force winds, heavy snow squalls, and mountainous seas. It was weather that should have favored a raider, but the British had an ace up their sleeve that negated the darkness and the storms. Radar. Unbeknownst to Bay, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had deciphered German naval enigma codes and knew his mission before he had even left port. The Commander-in-Chief of the British Home Fleet, Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, had laid a perfect trap. The convoy's close escort, including the cruisers HMS Belfast, Norfolk, and Sheffield, was ordered to place itself between the convoy and the Scharnhorst's likely approach. Sailing several hundred miles away, but closing fast, was Fraser himself in his flagship, the modern battleship HMS Duke of York, accompanied by the cruiser HMS Jamaica and 4 destroyers. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 26th, HMS Belfast's radar operators saw a single clear blip appear on his screen. It was Scharnhorst, exactly where they expected her. The British cruisers closed in. At a range of nearly 8 miles, 13 kilometers, they opened fire. The first star shells burst overhead, illuminating the sleek, gray silhouette of the German battleship. Scharnhorst was taken completely by surprise. Shells from HMS Norfolk slammed into her superstructure, destroying her primary forward radar array. In an instant, Scharnhorst was electronically blind. She was still a formidable fighting ship, but her ability to find the enemy in the blizzard had been crippled. Admiral Bay, now facing cruisers he could not accurately track, made the logical decision. He turned his powerful ship south, away from the British, using his superior speed to break contact. He had successfully evaded the cruisers, but he still had his orders. Believing he had shaken off his pursuers, he decided to perform a long, circling maneuver to try and attack the convoy from a different direction. It was a fatal mistake. He was unaware that he was not running away from a few cruisers, but steaming directly into the path of a far more powerful enemy. Admiral Fraser, on the Duke of York, had been tracking the entire engagement via radio signals from his cruisers and was plotting Scharnhorst's every move. He had positioned his force perfectly to intercept. At around 4:15 in the afternoon, the radar operators on the Duke of York got their contact. The trap was sprung. Fraser allowed the range to close to just 12,000 yards, a near point-blank range for his 10 massive 14-inch guns. He famously turned to his officers and said, "I am turning towards you." The first salvo was fired, guided entirely by radar. A star shell from HMS Belfast once again lit up the Scharnhorst, revealing her to the British battleship. The second salvo from Duke of York was a direct hit. The battle was on. For a while, Scharnhorst fought back with courage and skill. Her 11-inch guns fired rapidly, straddling the Duke of York, but failing to score a crippling hit. But the British battleship's fire was relentless and devastatingly accurate. Then came the decisive blow. A 14-inch shell fired from over 12 miles, 19 kilometers away, plunged through Scharnhorst's deck armor and penetrated deep into her hull. It exploded in or near boiler room number 1. The hit was catastrophic. It severed a main steam pipe, instantly robbing the ship of thousands of horsepower. Her speed, her greatest advantage, began to plummet. From a swift 30 knots, she bled speed down to 20, then 10. Her fate was sealed. Now crippled and unable to escape, she was a cornered animal. Admiral Fraser ordered his destroyers in for the kill. In a series of daring, high-speed attacks, the British and Norwegian destroyers charged through the heavy seas, launching dozens of torpedoes. At least 4 slammed into the Scharnhorst, tearing open her hull and causing massive flooding. The great ship was dying. She was listing heavily. Her upper decks were a blazing inferno, and her guns were falling silent one by one. The cruisers and the Duke of York closed in, pouring shell after shell into the helpless vessel. The end was brutal. Shortly after 7:45 in the evening, after being hit by an estimated 14 torpedoes and hundreds of heavy-caliber shells, the Scharnhorst capsized. She rolled over, her propellers still turning slowly in the air, and slid beneath the waves. The icy water was filled with the desperate cries of her crew. Of the 1,968 men on board, including Admiral Bay, only 36 were pulled from the freezing sea by the British. It was a staggering loss of life. The sinking of the Scharnhorst marked the end of an era. She was the last German capital ship to pose a serious threat to Allied shipping in the open ocean. Her loss was a testament to the decisive power of intelligence, the technological superiority of radar, and the overwhelming strength the Allies could bring to bear. For all her speed, power, and the skill of her crew, she was ultimately a relic of a previous age, defeated by the new doctrines of naval warfare. For over half a century, the Scharnhorst lay undisturbed in her watery grave, more than 1,000 feet, 300 meters below the surface. Then, in September 2000, a joint expedition by the Norwegian Navy and the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation finally located the wreck. She lies upside down on the seabed, a silent, ghostly monument to the men who served and died on her. Today, she is a protected war grave, a final, solemn resting place for nearly 2,000 sailors. The story of the Scharnhorst is a powerful reminder that in the calculus of war, even the most legendary ships are ultimately just steel, and steel can always be broken. The Battle of the North Cape was a textbook naval victory, but it was also a human tragedy. The few survivors spoke of Admiral Bay's bravery to the end and the professionalism of their crew in the face of certain death. So, what do you think is the most defining moment of the Scharnhorst's career? Was it the triumphant audacity of the Channel Dash, or the tragic high-tech ambush that led to her doom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe there's another warship, battle, or military legend whose story needs to be told, drop your mission briefing for us below. We're always looking for our next target. To ensure you don't miss that next deep dive into history, make sure you are subscribed and have sounded the alarm bell.